Hello and welcome to Mansion Interviews, a podcast which gives me an excuse to talk to interesting people while at the same time improving your English. I want to thank Mamen from Biescas in Aragon in the Pyrenees for introducing me to Luke and Luke's English podcast. She said how much she enjoys listening to Luke and how much she learns from him. So when I saw his podcast on iTunes, I immediately recognized his artwork, his album art, but I had never actually listened to his podcast. That was a few months ago, and since then I've become a huge fan and a regular listener of Luke. So I was thrilled when he agreed to be interviewed on Mansion Interviews. So let's dive in now to the interview. Vamos a empezar. And remember, you can improve your listening with comprehension questions and find some help with difficult words from this interview at inglespodcast.com/Luke. That's inglespodcast.com/Luke, Luke. Here's Luke from Luke's English podcast. Hello and welcome to Mansion Interviews. And this episode we have a very special guest, Mr. Luke Thompson. Luke Thompson, English teacher, musician, stand-up comedian, podcaster, rapper, YouTube videographer, blogger, and webmaster in charge of Luke's English podcast at teacherluke.co.uk. Winner of the Macmillan Dictionary Award for 3 or 4 years running. Luke, hello and welcome to the show. Is there anything you don't do?
Well, to be honest, I didn't realise I'd been so busy actually until I heard your introduction. Then I realised, my God, I've been really busy, haven't I?
You have.
I'm sure there are plenty of things I don't do. Like I don't do the washing up when I should do.
Right.
And there's probably other bits of housework that I should be doing.
So we have something in common. Neither of us do the washing up.
Right. Yeah. Well, we've got a dishwasher here now, and that's amazing. I've never really had the luxury of a dishwasher before. But in the flat that I'm living in now, we've got a dishwasher and it's amazing. So actually, I don't have to do the washing up. It's perfect.
Luke, I'd like to start by focusing on one thing that you do, a stand-up comedian. Now, right. I don't know if they say stand-up in French because you're in Paris, but I don't know. But in Spain, I think stand-up is stand-up. It's the same word.
Right.
Someone who tells jokes to an audience.
Yeah.
Now, I've always had the greatest respect and admiration for anyone with the courage, or we say the cojones, to do that. How do you feel when you're standing in front of an audience?
It's sort of a mixed feeling, really, because if I've got my jokes ready and I've got material and I feel prepared, then I just feel great. I just feel like, right, give me the opportunity. Let me try and make this room full of people laugh. So there's an excitement and there's a feeling that it's your opportunity to, do the stuff that you've been thinking about for a while. Like, it's exciting and there's nothing like it really when you make the room laugh. I mean, it's really special.
Is there an adrenaline rush from the reaction?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, people have described it in the past as being, like a high or something like that. And it's like that. Yeah. It's a kind of exciting adrenaline rush. But then there's always, the adrenaline, I suppose, comes not just from the fact that you're like making people laugh and you're doing it by telling stories about yourself often, but also there is that fear aspect as well. There's always that sense that, oh my God, if they don't laugh at this, then it's going to be very awkward and embarrassing, and I'm going to lose my dignity. And so there's
how do you feel when nobody laughs? If you tell a joke that you think's funny because you've written it and it makes you laugh, and nobody in the room laughs, how do you feel?
Oh yeah, it's awful. But you develop ways of dealing with it. So I mean, at the very worst, you feel terrible, and you feel like a waste of space, and you feel like your ideas are stupid, and there's no validity to what you're doing. So at worst, you feel really bad about yourself. But it can also be quite fun in a way when you're trying something and it's not working, because that puts you on the spot and it forces you to try and come up with something new to get that audience there and then. There's lots of language to describe stand-up comedy, which is quite sort of aggressive, really, which is interesting from a psychological point of view, because you think, what's really going on here? You got, like, for example, the language is that if a comic doesn't do very well, if no one laughs, then they die on stage, right?
Yeah, that's quite extreme.
Yeah,
isn't it?
very extreme language. And by the same token, if you do really well and you make the audience laugh so much, that they're falling off their chairs, then you kill. See, so what a comedian wants to do is kill, and
so you could die and kill in the same
exactly
evening.
Like you want to kill and you just don't want to die. That's that kind of gives you an idea of the sort of extreme nature of the experience. But that makes you fit, and that sort of gives the idea that it's very brutal and all messed up, dark psychologically. In actual fact, most of the time, it's just lots of fun. And
you did a gig recently in Paris, didn't you? Was it a couple of days ago?
Yeah, I gigged on Saturday actually.
How did it go?
It went really well. Yeah, it was great.
A full house I saw on Twitter.
Yeah, that's right. We had a full room, and I went up. So it was like not the last performer, but the performer before last. So the audience is like pretty warmed up at that point. And I did about 10 minutes, and it was great. I had a really, really good night, and ended on applause, which is always a nice thing, rather than like, thanks very much, that's been my time. And just silence. That's the worst thing. It doesn't happen very much, but I managed to get a good response throughout the set and at the end, which is nice.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. You, I think you used to work in media production, which to me sounds really exciting. I would have loved to have that chance to work in media production. Why did you change from that to English teaching?
Well, I sort of worked a little bit in media production. Yeah, after university, I spent some time temping and doing work experience placements in production companies in Soho. Why not? Well, it's complicated, really. I didn't feel like it was for me at the time. It wasn't really grabbing my interest and my attention. Plus, also, like my dad worked in the media for many years, and so I was walking around a lot. Some of the placements that I got, my dad had helped me to get them, right? So I was sort of like, in these places, and everyone I met was like, "Oh yes, I know your dad." And all this kind of thing, and it was like the sort of the sort of Star Wars effect. I felt like I want to go and establish myself on my own. I felt like I was living in my father's shadow. Again, there's more psychology there if you want to go into it.
How did you move over to the podcast and the website? What motivated you to start Luke's English podcast?
Well, I suppose it sort of came from that feeling of beginning in media. I'd always had this interest in that world, even though I didn't, when I first started, I didn't feel completely comfortable in it. I did come back to it in a way, I suppose. It wasn't really a conscious plan, but I think it's just something that I'd always wanted to do. I'd always wanted to do radio or to be involved in creating some broadcasting of some sort. And things, developed, the internet developed, and it got to a point where basically I bought a new computer, I bought a new laptop. It was an Apple Mac laptop. I hadn't had a Mac before, and it was suddenly like, wow, I can do all these things with GarageBand and all the jingles they have. And also I learned that I could just produce my own podcast and quite easily have it published on the iTunes store. And for a while I'd been thinking about what kind of things I could do. And I'd tried my hand at doing little funny YouTube videos and stuff like that. And then I realized, well, wait a minute, I've got a hugely untapped audience, a massive audience around the world of people who want to learn English. And after having taught English for a number of years, I've got some skills in that area. And I think I know how to appeal to that particular audience. And so kind of all these things came together. The fact that I could do it with the laptop. The internet, suddenly podcasting was this thing that meant, you could do quite easily. And I had some things to say and some people to say them to. And so I just decided to do it, and then got quite quickly got really addicted to doing it, and I still haven't stopped.
And that was it 2009 that you started?
That's right. Yeah. April 2009. So it's coming up to the 6th birthday of Luke's English podcast now.
Up to your anniversary.
Yeah.
So if obviously listeners of Inglés podcast of Mansion interviews will be keen to go over and check you out. So if an English student goes over to listen to your podcast, what sort of things would they hear? How would you describe it?
All kinds of stuff, really, because I try and do lots of different things. But they'll probably hear a combination of, like, sort of what I like to call authentic, natural English. That means not scripted and fairly spontaneous English. So a combination of unscripted, spontaneous English, direct teaching of language, your phrasal verbs and idioms and other natural expressions and things, discussion on topics that I find really interesting, and I hope my listeners will too. And then just sort of random, I don't know really how to describe it, rambling.
Random rambling.
Yeah. That's right.
Well, I've listened to quite a few, and I find the rambling very interesting. And I'd like to emphasize that this isn't only for people who want to improve their English. I mean, myself as a native speaker, I really enjoy listening to the ramblings. I find them very interesting.
Great. Oh, that's very promising to hear. I'm always glad to hear that when people enjoy it, not just for learning English. Obviously, that's what I'm trying to do is, do something for learners of English that is also sort of entertaining and just engaging to listen to. Because I believe that if people who are learning English just listen to something long term, and they do it because they're actually motivated to hear what I'm talking about, if they're actually engaging with what's being said on a personal level, either through humor or some other aspect, then that's ultimately going to be really good for their English, because you've got things like language acquisition theory, which we probably know about, and that basically states that language is acquired when, as a sort of side effect of just trying to engage in a meaningful way with the message. And I mean, there's that sort of language acquisition model. And then also there's the more active study approach. And I try and combine the two if possible. So
absolutely. It's got to be interesting, Luke, because I mean, if the students are bored, then they're not going to learn and they're not going to listen. So I think that's our job, really, to make it as interesting as possible so that they keep coming back and hopefully improve their English and learn along the way.
Absolutely, yeah.
One thing that I'm really interested to hear about, your transcriptions, which I think is a wonderful project.
Yeah.
What's happening with your transcriptions? Because I understand you don't actually sit down at the computer and write them all yourself.
No, I used to do that a bit in the early days. And, as you know, it just takes ages and ages to write transcripts. It's a very long process. And I just thought to myself, why am I doing this? Because actually I can already speak my own language. Because as I was doing the transcripts, I was thinking, this is a really great exercise, because I'm listening really carefully to everything I'm saying. It's weird. It was weird for me to listen to myself after having recorded while writing transcripts. It was weird on one hand, because it's not very nice to listen to your own voice for any long period of time. Starts to make you go a bit crazy. And yet on the other hand, I was thinking, this is a very good language listening exercise. So I thought, well, I think my listeners would benefit from doing this. And I had mentioned that a few times on the podcast, and I was getting transcripts sent to me by email from some listeners who, just had the great idea to sit down and transcribe episodes. So they were sending them to me by email and so on. And I was finding it a little bit hard to manage. And I think another one of my listeners suggested that I set up a collaboration using Google Documents. So that's what I did. And so basically set up some Google documents for loads of episodes, and I announced it on the podcast. I did a whole episode about how the transcript collaboration would work. And then I found, I don't know how long it's been, a year and a half maybe of doing that I now have a huge list of completed transcripts, all done by various listeners to the podcast. And it's actually working out. The thing now, sort of phase 2, is to actually get all of those scripts proofread and then published.
I was going to say, do you then go in when it's more or less done and just go over it and make any minor adjustments before it's published?
Yeah, that's the way it has to be done. And so ultimately it does just give me even more work. I've got some great people, some great listeners who are managing the transcripts, and it's brilliant. It's actually really great to be part of this collaboration with my listeners. And I've got some.
It's a wonderful project.
Yeah.
I'm so impressed that your followers are doing this, that your fans are doing this. It's a fantastic idea.
Yeah. So, but the thing is that now I have to be the one who checks them finally, because even the best listeners make little mistakes, and often it's those little mistakes that are the things that they need, that my listeners are missing. Like, they get the main things, they get the main meaningful words, but then there are little things like, auxiliary verbs or prepositions which are hard to hear, and so that really requires a native speaker to proofread the scripts that they've done. So that's it. I now have a large list of transcripts to proofread, and I'm working my way through them slowly.
Luke, we've got about 5 minutes. I'd like to move into what I call the quick-fire hot set part of the interview. So a few quick questions. Just tell me what you think.
Okay, I'm ready.
What makes you happy?
What makes me happy is like really, really good tea or coffee with my girlfriend when the sun is shining. And that's all I need. Just a decent cup of coffee. Like special sort of posh coffee, artisanal hipsters coffee, or like a really good cup of tea, English breakfast tea with milk, Yorkshire tea, please, and a chocolate biscuit, and my girlfriend, and sunshine, and that's pretty much it.
I'll remember that if you ever come over to Spain to visit. I'll have some ready.
All right, brilliant.
What annoys you?
What annoys me is people being really inconsiderate on public transport. All right. Now, I live in Paris, and Paris is a wonderful city with so much to offer. But once you go underground and get into the metro, it's like, I don't know what happens down there, but people just sort of lose all of their politeness. And so people bump into each other. People aren't looking where they're going, and they're just not really being considerate of what's going on around them. I find that to be a bit annoying. That's like my pet hate about urban life. It's just
quite common in many big cities and capital cities, I think. So I totally understand.
Yeah.
Where would you go in a time machine?
Well, I'd probably stay in the same place. I'll just be at a different time, because I think. Do you know what I mean? Like,
would you go forward or back?
Okay, right. In terms of like my location, I think that would stay the same, but the time. So I'm being pedantic about the physics of time travel, because I've been asked that question before. It's like, where would you go? Well, I'd stay here, but it would be a different time. So I'm just being very pedantic. Sorry.
No worries. Another. Yes.
So what time? I'd probably go. Let's see. Forward or back? I want to go forwards. I want to see I just want to see if we make it, basically.
Yeah. But what if we don't?
Well, then I will probably
come back
I'll
again.
Just come back really quickly.
Yeah.
Because I imagine if we haven't made it, then the Earth probably won't be in a very hospitable place. Probably very gassy, and probably lots of sulfur or something. I don't know. So I'd probably get the hell out of there and go back to 1967. See if I could hang out with the Beatles.
Cool. If you were a biscuit, which would you be?
I like that question, and I think I would be the custard cream, because
goes well with the tea.
It goes well with the tea, and I've got a hard crust on the surface. But if you get through the hard crust, you'll find that I'm very soft and sweet on the inside.
Oh, it's nice.
Actually, I don't really
Which
have a very hard crust, to be honest with you. I'm a custard cream that's been dunked into a cup of tea because I've got a soft crust and a soft and sweet inside. That's it. And I'm full of tea.
which book have you given as a gift the most?
I think it's probably a book called Revolution in the Head by Ian MacDonald, who was a brilliant writer who wrote all about the Beatles. I'm a huge fan of the Beatles, so I'm kind of a Beatles geek. And Revolution in the Head is brilliant because it deals with all of the songs the Beatles ever wrote, and it goes into ridiculous amounts of detail about the recording process and about the meaning behind the songs. So any Beatles fans I have in my group of friends, I'll give them that book.
I will be checking that on Amazon to give to my sister because she is a huge Beatles fan. She'd really enjoy that.
Right.
Revolution in my head is a line from an Oasis song.
Revolution in the head.
In the head.
But the Oasis one is I'm going to start a revolution from my bed.
Oh, from my bed.
And I think that's a reference to John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and the bedding for peace and all that stuff that they did. I think that's what it's referring to.
That makes sense. Yeah. If you could be a superhero, what would you want your superpowers to be? And can you answer that question either as Christopher Walken or Robert De
Niro? Put me on the spot now. Let's do a really bad Christopher Walken impression. Well, if I was a superhero, I'd be Batman. I don't know, who would I be? If De Niro was a superhero. See, the De Niro impression only worked visually, Craig. If I do it audibly, this is it.
Okay, yeah, that's what I saw in the video. Yeah. You have to be there.
Sort of breathing through the nose.
Yeah,
and a facial expression that doesn't really work through the audio. But okay, if I was a superhero, I think I'd be Superman, to be honest, because I mean he's clearly the best superhero, isn't he?
I think so. I think he is. I mean, there's no one who could beat Superman in a bar fight. I don't think so. He's the strongest. He can fly, for God's sake.
He can actually turn back time as well. In the original Superman, he just flies around the Earth.
Exactly.
Really fast, and somehow that has the effect of turning the clocks back. I don't know how that works. I'm not sure about the physics behind that, but I'm not going to question it, Craig. If you're going to give me the opportunity to be Superman, then I'm going to take it. Superman, please. I just want those laser eyes.
X-ray vision.
Yeah. So if anyone needs, whenever anyone comes up to me in the street and goes, "Have you got a light?" Because I've got a cigarette, that I can just casually just look at the cigarette and then make it burn.
How cool would that be?
Yeah, I'm sure there are better things that you could do as Superman.
Luke, I think we'll finish here. Where can people find you, and how can they listen to and subscribe to your podcast?
Well, probably the best place to go is to my website, where they can find, all the information. I say all the information. I have kept some things private. Like I'm not sharing much, what color my underwear is or anything. Not yet. Anyway.
Not yet.
But teacherluke.co.uk is where people can go if they'd like to check out the podcast and have a look at what's available. And so join the gang of listeners, the increasing group of listeners that I have, and go to teacherluke.co.uk. It's really, really nice to be interviewed by you, Craig. Thanks for choosing to talk to me.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. I've wanted to for a while, and I'm pleased we managed to get to have a chat. It's been good fun.
Yeah, me too.
Do you ever get over to Spain, because you're on the other side of the Pyrenees, not that far?
Well, not for a while. I did go to Spain a few years ago to go climbing, because I used to climb. I used to be a rock climber. I haven't done that so much since moving to Paris, but I went down to Benidorm actually. Not with all the other English.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, not with all the other English tourists.
of all the beautiful places you could have visited in Spain, you went to Benidorm.
Actually, to be honest with you, if you avoid the seafront, if you avoid all the tattooed English tourists, and you travel inland a bit, there are some really great areas with rocks for climbing, and beautiful
true,
tree-lined valleys with lots of peace and quiet and nature. It's a great place to go rock climbing if you just go off the beaten track a little bit. So
it's true. There's a place called Sierra de Bernia, which is a lovely place to go climbing. It's not far from Benidorm.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So we managed to avoid all of the horrible English tourists for the most part. Although, to be honest, we did venture into town for a Sunday roast at one point. So
the spot of karaoke.
Well, no, nah, we didn't go for the karaoke. We were just like, quick, let's go in like ninjas. Just go in and get a Sunday roast, and then get out of there before we get dragged into some karaoke.
Without being seen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks very much. Cheers, mate.
Right.
Take
Thanks
care.
a lot, Craig. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
That interview really was a lot of fun. Thank you for listening to Mention Interviews. You can find more podcasts to improve your English at inglespodcast.com. And you can study English free at mencioningles.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes and give us some stars and maybe a short review so that more people can find our podcasts. Thank you.